Texting terms at unlock.com/SMS. Privacy policy at unlock.com/privacy-policy. Texting enrolls for recurring automated text marketing messages. Message and data rates may apply. Reply stop to opt out. Terms and conditions apply. For full details, see unlock.com/legal. Actor portrayal.
Lisa, thanks for having me over. Your new kitchen is gorgeous. How'd you find the money to do it?
We worked with this great company, Unlock. They help you unlock the future value of your home to get the cash you need today.
So it's a home equity loan?
No, it's not a loan at all. There's no monthly payments and no interest charges ever. And you can use the money however you want. We were able to redo our kitchen and pay off our credit card debt.
Wow, Jack and I could really use this to finally pay off our old student loan debt. How do I get started?
It's easy. Just go to their website.
Text EQUITY to 865-865 to unlock the value in your home and get up to $500,000 in cash with no monthly payments and no interest ever. Pay off debt, improve your home, add to your retirement fund. It's up to you. Text EQUITY to 865-865. Text the word EQUITY to 865-865. Text EQUITY to 865-865 now.
Head to Safeway this week for these amazing digital deals for members. USDA Choice Boneless Beef Top Round London Broil, just $4.97 per pound. Limit 2 packages. Add ears of sweet corn as a side for just 27 cents each. Limit 10. And for you cheese lovers, Lucerne chunk or cream cheese or Sargento shredded or sliced cheese, just $2.47 each. Limit 4 items of various sizes and varieties. Visit Safeway.com for more details. See you in the aisles.
I have been learning how to play the harmonica. I was even taking lessons. And then just working with Bob Dylan, and I actually gave up the harmonica because I felt like an idiot, playing harmonica, like with Bob Dylan around. It's like ridiculous.
Welcome to Story and Craft. Now, here's your host, Mark Preston.
Okay, here we go. Back again, you and I. Thank you so much for stopping back by. It means a lot to me. Hey, if you're brand new to the show, welcome. My name is Mark Preston, and, we've been out for 3 weeks, or I lost track of, it's just a few weeks. Took a little hiatus, spent a little bit of time with, I used to call them my little people. They're not so little anymore. My college kids, my youngest daughter about to go off to Europe to study for the fall semester. Also, my son, who is about to wrap up his last semester of college. So, enjoyed spending some time with them, stirring up a little bit of mischief. So took a moment to do that. Back today with a great episode, sitting down with comedy icon Larry Charles. Now, Larry has written, produced, directed, some of the most notable television shows, movies over the last 20, 30 plus years. Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Entourage. He's worked with Sacha Baron Cohen on Borat and Bruno and The Dictator, and also Mad About You, Bill Maher's documentary, Religulous. He's also done The Comedians with Billy Crystal and Josh Gad. He is just done a lot, and he's documented it in his new memoir called Comedy Samurai, 40 Years of Blood, Guts, and Laughter. We talk about that, and really it was just very cool to sit down with a guy who has his kind of pedigree. He's been there, he's done it, and he's got stories from the field. Do me a favor if you would, just a small little favor, grab your device, phone, iPad, computer. Well, don't grab your computer. Well, you get what I'm saying. Go ahead and follow Story and Craft if you would. That way you get notified every time a new episode comes out. Also, leave a review, leave some stars, a little bit of love. Always appreciated. Also, if you go to storyandcraftpod.com, everything about the show, it's right there. Past guests, reach out, drop me a note. Always love hearing from you. That's very cool. So it is all right there. And also on the front page, you can see some ways where you can help support Story and Craft. Some new cool ways to kind of be a part of what we got going on. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Today, it's Larry Charles Day, right here on Story and Craft. Where are you joining me from today?
I am in Ventura, California. My house in Malibu burned down in the fires in January. And so we were homeless for a while and kind of vagabonds.
I'm so sorry to hear that. I had lost a home as a result of a hurricane. And I know that feeling of like, okay, what do we do next? And then you start really prioritizing. You start really realizing how important stuff is. And you start at the same time, you start realizing some things were more valuable than you thought. It's a whole mental exercise. No, but I'm glad to know you're okay. That's the most important thing.
We're okay. Our dogs are okay. But you're really right about that. I mean, things that seem trivial or frivolous have been imbued with a certain significance over time. And when you lose those things, you start to kind of feel the loss of those things as well. There's nothing, almost everything is replaceable that's important, but there are things that are irreplaceable that are kind of very poignant losses in our life.
For me, it was like, I didn't lose everything, and that's the difference that I fire. Hurricanes, they're coming, you can compare it to a degree. But if you're a little bit of a pack rat, I wasn't a pack rat, but there's some stuff I'm like, I just don't need that anymore. I don't know why I'm still schlepping it around with me. Okay, well, Mother Nature took care of that for me. So,
right. Well, we had a fire in 2018, not to belabor this point, but we had a fire in 2018, and we've evacuated a number of times. In 2018, we evacuated for like 2 weeks. We couldn't come back. And when we survived that fire, I took everything I had of like value, like memorabilia and stuff that I had accumulated, and I actually put that in a vault. So all that stuff is saved, and I felt very lucky about that. But I've accumulated, because I am a pack rat, I've accumulated a lot of stuff from 2018 to the present, and most of that stuff was completely obliterated. So, it's a lot.
Yeah. The thing I'm doing now, when my father passed, I ended up, my grandparents passed and my father passed, and I'm now the recipient of untold boxes which reside in one of my kids' closets of pictures going back to the 30s and earlier.
Yeah.
And I keep telling myself I need to sit down and scan all these pictures, and then, because I always hear about people say, I lost all these pictures. Like, you didn't scan any of them? Which is something our kids never will even think about because it's all digital.
Yeah. True.
So are you rebuilding in the same spot, or are you kind of reconsidering?
No, I don't think we'll be able to go back to Malibu anytime soon. We might be able to rent a house there. We're actually going to look at a house this weekend in Malibu to possibly rent, because this place in Ventura is temporary. But we're looking elsewhere also. I mean, we've been talking for years about going north, and, I'm not sure where to go. And that's one of the things that comes in the wake of this is like, wow, where should we go? We could go anywhere now. And and with all the political craziness, we've even thought about Canada. So we're sort of like, we're exploring our options right now. We'll figure something out.
By the way, congratulations on the book. There's so much stuff I really want to sit down and even digest even more of it. But
thank you.
A lot of what you've done is, I was trying to think of a way earlier to phrase this, but it's been, it's kind of like messages in the world that kind of need to get out, or contemplations, the satire, and which we'll get to all that. But just in the last 24 hours, it's just like, okay, there's some really unserious people having a lot of control over our lives right now. Yeah.
That's a really great way to put it. It seems like we're in like a science fiction novel, and a science fiction satire. And it is hard to know what the truth is. It's hard to ground yourself to know what.
Well, that's their objective, isn't it?
Yes.
To not even know what truth is.
It's working. I think we're all kind of unsettled and unmoored, and I think as long as we're off balance, they have control.
I look at it like this. I remember going to Hebrew school and all that as a young kid, and I'm sure the whole never forget thing. I think there's a certain resonance to that message and that vibe, and that in my ninth grade American history books. Talked about a lot of what's going on turn of the last century,
right?
And it makes me wonder, for somebody like yourself, is it in a backwards way? Is this beneficial? Is it inspirational to you to create something new, a new story, a new message, a new way to communicate the absurdity of the moment? Are weird times like this inspirational to you in any way to create comedy?
Well, I think in a perverse sense, yes. I can take, comedy, as somebody once said, and many people take credit for the quote, is tragedy plus time, So there's a lot of tragedy, and comedy, as I've learned over the years, my favorite kind of comedy, the comedy that I kind of traffic in, is often like a thin line between the tragedy and the comedy. Finding things that aren't funny and finding an angle that allows you to find a comic hook for it, an angle that will make it funny, and without exploiting it, without cheapening it, respecting it on some level, but also finding the humor in it, which is right there on the surface. And people need that outlet also when they're facing these insurmountable things.
If not, I think you're going to get a bottling up, sociologically, a bottling up of a lot of stuff that's going to pop at some point in a very, you can't forecast that. But like George Carlin, I think, was just a master at just like right now. I'm like, if we could just almost like, say a prayer, can we get him back just for a few months just to comment on what's going on? Right. Because he foretold all of this.
I just heard a new George Carlin thing that I'd never heard before. It's called, it's an album that kind of got suppressed, and it's called I Kind of Like It When a Lot of People Die. And I was like, wow, I can't believe that's the title of the album. And I listened to it, and it is the most extreme George Carlin album. It's one of his last things that he recorded. He recorded it on 9/10/2001. And that was,
no kidding. How did you rummage this up? Because I remember his last comedy special or two where I know he got some people dinged him because it seemed like it was a little acidic.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of the culmination of just, it's almost as if it's his way of saying, were y'all not listening to me? Right. Like a frustration, kind of
This was first of all, it's really super funny, but it's also as dark as you could possibly get. But Carlin is such a skilled craftsman that he is able to find the angle, the hook, to talk about mass death in a way that is undeniably funny and yet still honors the horror of it at the same time.
Yeah.
And I heard about it. I was listening to some interview with Anthony Jeselnik and another comedian. And Anthony brought up this thing, and I'd never heard of it. And I immediately went to iTunes, and there it was. And
what was the name of it again?
It's called I Kind of Like It When a Lot of People Die. It is one of a kind. It is one of a kind. The good thing about you want to bring back George Carlin, which I understand that would be great. But the good thing about stand-up is that there are always progeny. There are progeny of Lenny Bruce and of Richard Pryor and of George Carlin, and there are stand-ups today working who are mining that territory and walking that line. So there are like sort of the children of George Carlin are out there.
You have such a deep well. I don't even know where to kind of fish out, the good. I mean, there's so much great stuff. Like right now, I'm like, okay, it would be a good time right now for a re-release of Religulous. Yeah. That would be great, But I just am curious, what was the impetus for you to write the book? Were you just trying to pull all these notes and ideas together, kind of explain where you're at? Besides just telling some stories, what was the impetus for putting the book together?
Well, the original draft, by the way, was 1,000 pages long. So I had been making notes on my life from the time I was a kid. I don't know why, but I had always kept, I have a great memory for some reason, genetically, and I have always kept track of these crazy, surreal events in my life, starting with my childhood, which was the first 500 pages originally of this book that we cut that, and we're going to make that a separate book because they didn't want to publish a 1,000-page book. It's just not economically really feasible these days for most books. So I've just been keeping track of this with the thought of writing something at some point, and it's spilled over into my professional life. I've had so many surreal professional experiences as well. I'm just somebody who has weird stuff happen to them, and and so I kept track of all of it. And then when the pandemic happened and I was kind of sitting around, I thought, well, maybe this is the time. I was hungry to do something, and I was kind of restrained by the pandemic, and I was able to sit in my house and start working on the book. And I actually wrote the book on spec, without thinking about what I thought. Maybe I'd publish it myself. I didn't know what I was going to do. And suddenly I had this 1,000-page book. I gave it to my agent, and then the rest is what you're looking at.
I think it's wonderful. I think, to say that you've been a part of things that have been talked about a lot, be it a series that just hit. There's certain things I don't know if could happen today. I don't know, because you have so many different, you talk about Seinfeld, when you had only 3, I guess we had 4 networks back then, but you didn't have streamers and all that, it had me thinking, what would Larry Charles do today? What would be different, or would there be any kind of difference in your approach? Because back then you could have one show, and it's like that, or like shows like ER or whatever, which had insane audiences.
Really tens of millions of people in those days when there was only a few choices. Today, I could tell you I would be, and I have a YouTube channel. I mean, I would be doing much more independent stuff. I would be sidestepping the mainstream media, most likely, and trying to go directly to the audience through YouTube or other methods like that. I think that would be where most of my work would be at this point. And that's where I'd like most of my work to be going forward even now. But I think if I was starting, the liberation of YouTube without having to go through the studios and the production executives and the notes and the filters that try to, take the edge off of everything, you could create something, whatever it is, by the way, and form is even more, open-ended now than it used to be, too. A sitcom had certain rules. A variety show has certain rules. Now there are no rules either. You create your own set of rules, and if it works, and the barometer for something working is, does an audience respond to it? Does it resonate with an audience? You could do that directly. You put your thing on YouTube, and you just let it out there and see what happens. That, to me, is a very exciting way to create without the middleman. And that's definitely what I would be doing now, and that is sort of what I am doing now.
I completely identify with that. I started off my career, I think 17 years old, working in radio in Dallas, and I in a very short time I ended up working at ABC on a syndicated show, and it was really great. And I'm like, that's one thing I love about this format of a podcast is it's kind of, I've done the thing where you're formatted, you've got your network clocks you have to think about, and all these other kind of things, and I'm like, what do I want to do? What is, and I'm hard-headed enough to do whatever the heck I want to do. Sometimes, it's like, this makes sense to me because in traditional radio format, you had 5, maybe if you're lucky, 15 minutes to chat with somebody, and it's usually hyper-focused. The opportunity to speak with you. I'm like, yeah, this is what I love. I got be able to ask other questions. You talk about the YouTube idea. Is it something? And I haven't had the opportunity to check it out yet. But is it something where you're is it commentary, or is it? Are you doing?
I'm as you might know from my inability to kind of do all the stuff that were the requirements for the podcast itself. I'm a technophobe. I'm really not very good with the technology of anything really, like from a toaster on up, and so. What I've done a lot of are these social or political commentaries where I'm just using my phone and just filming myself doing a 2 to 3 to 10 to 20 minute essay directly into the phone and then putting that out on social media. I've also, with my own money and very small amounts of money, I might add, I've made like 3 documentaries, let's call them nonfiction shows, not really documentaries. One is called Who Killed God, which is kind of like a whodunit about I was looking at the world going, wow, the world is so messed up. If there is a God, if there was a God, where is he? And so I had this idea of a kind of a Dateline type of thing about who killed God. And I did a documentary. I had written a treatment for a Smothers Brothers miniseries that didn't sell. So I took that and I made that into a documentary of my own for YouTube, So I've done these things that are like YouTube centric, and reaching a certain good audience, and that's been exciting. Again, bypassing all the notes and all the filters that you usually have to go through to get that stuff done. And doing it, I'm also committed to trying to do things on as low a budget as I possibly can. Also, I don't want to indulge myself. I don't believe in that kind of Hollywood indulgence where movies cost $250 million. It seems crazy to me. So I love the idea of doing these things like out of pocket and being able to reach an audience, and the audience doesn't care how much it costs,
Yeah, like you'd mentioned even in your book, just the way you described, I think, the Paramount lot, the offices there, how unsexy it was, how dingy, it's not really the money gets done. You show up and you just kind of put yourself into it. You start creating, and what happens. And looking at your body of work, I'm like, and when I talk to guests, it's like you think of what does it take to get a movie or a TV show made? Go from an idea to, okay, it's out there. It's a miracle sometimes, it seems like. But now you could literally, like you say, pick up your phone. You've put something into the world. You're talking about your wonderful memory. I have a good friend of mine named Chris who's sort of, I think I have a decent memory for the years gone by, but he remembers all the minutia. That's when I love talking to him. Like, you remember like little things like what our kindergarten teacher might have been wearing one day or so. I don't know how he does it, but it's a miracle. The origin story wise, going back, you grew up in New York, right? Or where exactly did you grow up?
I grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up in a section of Brooklyn called Coney Island, Brighton Beach. I grew up right in the middle there in a place ironically called Trump Village. And Trump Village was a housing project, a 7-building housing project for low-income families built by Donald Trump's father, Fred, who was
I saw that. I was like, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to touch base on that because you have a front row seat to the unfortunate origin story of where we are right now. So what were your folks up to? I mean, what was their, where were your people from and how they kind of get to where, because it sounds like to me, were they first generation in the U.S. or?
Yeah, my father was first generation. In fact, he was the baby of his family. And, his parents spoke Yiddish. They were from Russia and Poland. My mother's side of the family had been here a couple of generations already, were much more Americanized. But both of my parents were extremely American and also born in that time, like in the late 20s, early 30s, where they were like coming of age after World War II. My father was in the occupation forces in World War II in Japan. And he came out of World War II, and instead of like a lot of people at that time using the GI Bill to buy a house or something, he used it to go to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. He wanted to be an actor and he wanted to be a comedian. And his stage name was Psycho, the Exotic Neurotic. And he tried to break into show business and really didn't have the persistence required to make it, and eventually dropped out and essentially regretted that decision his entire life, and never really found his footing in life because he was so in love with show business and had kind of
Well, where do you think that love came from? Was it something that he just loved watching, or was he just a ham? I mean, where did that love of show business come from?
He was a ham, and he was on all the time when we were kids. And he was basically our comedian, in my house. He was doing shtick all the time, and he loved movies. Instead of pushing me to like learn or my math or do my homework in science, he was like, "Who starred in this movie? What's quote this?" And he was always trying to get me into the movie trivia and stuff, which worked. Because I was inspired by that to a large degree, and he instilled that dream in me. And he had a lot of friends from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts who didn't wind up being actors, but stayed in show business. And we would go visit them in their various jobs, like, the production manager of the Ed Sullivan Show, or, the lighting director for the Kraft Music Hall. And he would take me as a little kid to see the rehearsals of the Ed Sullivan Show and of Kraft Music Hall and things like that. And if we saw a celebrity in the street in Manhattan when we go to a movie, he would stop and talk to that person. So I was very exposed. And also seeing the Ed Sullivan rehearsals. My father was into the glitz and the glamour and the stardom. Mm-hmm. But I was like, wow, is this how you do a TV show? I found it fascinating, like all the logistics of a TV show. And I think that also got planted in my mind, the behind the scenes.
Well, it sounds like he kind of gave you the idea that this is within reach. This is not, so far out there where you could never get to it.
Yes and no, because I think he was not at all, I know this sounds strange based on what I just said, but he was not at all encouraging of me to do this. This was just what he wanted to do, and he kind of dragged me along with him, and inadvertently, it had a major impact on me.
What did he end up doing? Was he trying different things, or did he kind of lock into a different profession for most of his career.
He drifted quite a bit. He had little businesses. He had jobs. When he would start to get successful at something, like he went and became an accountant for a while, and he started working in hospitals as a controller, and he kind of worked his way up. He was a smart guy, and he was a together person if he wanted to be, but it never filled that hole, and he would leave. And he was very unfaithful to my mother, and he was very self-destructive in a lot of ways. So no matter how close he came to finding something else to fill that hole, he would also sabotage it in some way, you know? So he drifted through his entire life looking for something that he wanted and never really, really found it.
Was your mother a stay-at-home mother, or was she working as well?
My mom was also wanted to be an entertainer. She was a singer, and she made a record when she was a teenager, you know. But again, her parents were very discouraging and said, "This is ridiculous. You have to get married." And so she basically was a housewife most of her life, and also very unfulfilled until my parents finally got divorced. We moved down to Florida. She married somebody else. That was an unhappy marriage as well. And when that husband, the second husband, who was a good guy, but when he passed away, that's when she was able to liberate herself. They had moved to a condo development. She became the star of the condo. She starred in all the condo shows. You know, she did Chicago and all these shows, and she was the star. And she was finally able, in a way that my father didn't, she was able to find an outlet for her creative muse, you know?
Hi, it's Daniel from John Buys Bay Area Houses. We hear from homeowners every day who need to sell fast, whether it's a life change, a problem property, or they just can't wait around.
After my divorce, the house felt too big, and I wanted to downsize.
I needed to relocate for a new job, but my house was holding me back.
At John Buys Bay Area Houses, we make selling your house simple. Sell as is without any fees, commissions, or hassles. Just call 510-800-JOHN or visit our website and you'll get a fair cash offer in minutes.
I found the perfect smaller home. It's a huge relief.
They took care of everything, and I could move on time.
Start fresh. Don't let your house hold you back. Call 510-800-JOHN or search online for John Buys Bay Area Houses to get your cash offer today. That's 510-800-JOHN.
Start fresh with John Buys Bay Area Houses.
Kia has 10 electrified utility vehicles to choose from. Whether you're ready to take a Kia Sportage Turbo Hybrid on a road trip, a professional looking to navigate traffic in an EV9, or someone who wants electric for every day and fuel for far away with a Sorento plug-in hybrid, Kia has something for you. Find out more at your local Kia showroom today. Kia, movement that inspires.
Call 800-333-4KIA for details. Always drive safely. The 2025 Sorento PHEV has an EPA estimated all-electric range of 31 miles on a full battery charge. Actual range will vary.
Hey, it's Mark Preston, and I would like to tell you a little bit about one of our sponsors, X-Chair. Whether you're working from home or in the office, if you have a job or a task that has you sitting for a long period of time, this is the chair for you. Very comfortable, very customizable. They'll make it pretty much any way you want it. The look, the feel, the fabrics, everything. Plus, this is the kind of chair you can adjust to make it fit you just right. No matter your body type, it's spot on. I love my X-Chair. It has the Elemax cooling, heating, and massage technology. It is going to make your lower back feel so very good. Got to throw a little bit of love to X-Chair. It's the chair I'm sitting in every time I talk to a guest. So I've had a lot of time to have my tush in this chair, and the tush, the back, everybody's happy. Just go to storyandcraftpod.com/chair. Once again, X-Chair, check it out, storyandcraftpod.com/chair. Love my X-Chair. Your back will thank you. Well, you're watching both of your parents at different levels of, inspiration and disappointment. How did that color your decisions? Because you're at a young age, I mean, we're so impressionable, and probably by the time you're in junior high school, you're seeing your parents a little bit more clear of eyes and kind of where they're at. How did that inform what you chose to do?
Well, I don't, it's in a way, it's like I didn't even have a choice. I knew from a very early age that I wanted to be involved in the arts in some way. I was a cartoonist. I didn't know what form it would take, but I knew that I was attracted to that world in some way. It seemed like cartooning or writing stories was something that might be attainable. The idea of show business or, being on TV shows or making movies, that seemed like a distant, unrealistic dream to a large degree. But I knew I wanted to do something. I would have been happy, at least at that time, being a freelance cartoonist or writing short stories, or that kind of world was fine with me, and I was prepared for that. But inadvertently stumbled into Los Angeles and, show business, and it worked out. But I knew that I didn't want to wind up like my parents. I love my parents, but I didn't want to wind up with a dream deferred and look back and go, wow.
Well, they're a wonderful cautionary, not a bad, but a cautionary tale. You saw the result of not, sticking with it for of course they had responsibilities. They had you, but did you have any brothers or sisters growing up as well?
I had a younger brother. I still have him. He's still around. And it was the two of us. Yeah. And that was it though. Just the two of us.
What did he end up doing? Was he inspired kind of the same
way? My
My
brother, I don't know how much he's comfortable talking about. He was kind of a lost child because my father had lost interest in the family by the time my brother was born, who's about 3 years younger than me. And so by the time I was 6 or 7 or 8, somewhere around there, my brother was 4 or 5, my father was like drifting, and he was, seeing other women, and he just wasn't around anymore. And he was like very absent for quite a few years before my parents broke up. And so my brother was very fatherless, and he found solace kind of like in the kids in Brooklyn, and kind of was like, got into kind of I hesitate to call it a gang thing, but that's really what he found, a family there, Mm-hmm. Where I was like the kind of the darling of my actual family, my extended family. My brother was kind of like a sort of a outsider in that world. He wasn't interested in that world and loved being with his friends. And so he kind of also drifted for a long time, got involved in some, criminal activities, paid the price, even though he was a solid, honorable person with a family. And eventually he's found some peace, and he's having some kind of contented life at this point. But he also, I think, had dreams of something else and didn't really pursue it. And there was nobody around, and I didn't help him really, but there was nobody around to sort of encourage him to go down that path,
But of course, you're young as well. We're not old. I doubt you're wired at that age to know how to be able to help.
No, I could look back on it now and see that. But at the time, I was kind of like concerned with my own pursuit, and mm-hmm. That's sort of how that worked out.
You're a great guy to ask this question too. Being a Jewish kid, I always loved bar mitzvahs and weddings and stuff. When the old guys would get together, and you would talk, there was a different vocabulary, the way they communicate, and their sense of humor and sensibility. And it made me wonder, what in your mind is it in the Jewish DNA that so many of our tribe have found their way into comedy and, the world that you have succeeded in?
Well, first of all,
do you think there is something in the water, or is it kind of like the pizza in New York? It's like, it's the water.
Well, being a Jewish kid in Dallas, by the way, I knew a few Jewish families in Dallas. And to me, that was like an alien experience.
Our family actually came up through Galveston, which is kind of there. There's an interesting documentary called Shalom Y'all about how all these Jews came through, like Mobile and New Orleans and Galveston. And yeah. And I'm still, he would have made a great governor compared to knucklehead we have now. But yeah, what do you think was what do you think is the thing that kind of precipitated so many Jewish folks? Was the vaudevillian thing, or what do you think it was or is?
There's a couple of, I've thought about this a lot. For one thing, the part of Brooklyn that I grew up in also fostered Larry David, Mel Brooks, Woody Allen, Lenny Bruce. A lot of comedy, a lot of seminal comedy came out of just this neighborhood in Brooklyn. It was kind of like how Kingston, Jamaica was like this little place that sort of fostered, reggae. This little golden triangle of comedy in Brooklyn wound up being like this incredibly, rich breeding ground for comedy. Why that was? The reason, in my opinion, this was working class poor people, really, to a large degree, but very Jewish. I went to like a very religious Hebrew school, Orthodox Hebrew school.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
My parents were secular, but my grandparents and my larger family was very Jewish. And the neighborhood you grew up in, this Brighton Beach, Coney Island neighborhood, was almost it was like a shtetl. It was almost completely Jewish, and so there was no almost exposure to the outside world. And I think the other part of it that was important is there was this, there's a rabbinical quality to this. I had thought about being a rabbi at one point when I was a kid. I think this Talmudic sort of interaction, the debate that goes on in the Talmud, where people are kind of giving opinions back and forth. I always felt that was kind of like the basis for almost like writing comedy. You're exploring questions, and if you explore those questions, and some of them are absurd. If you look at the Talmud, a lot of those questions are absurd. I think that humor almost naturally grew out of this Talmudic exploration, and I think that may have been part of the DNA of Jewish comedy that became so seminal and so influential. I think that was a big part of it. That sort of tradition, and then being in these very oppressed environments in Eastern Europe, I think again for survival purposes. And now you could go to Africa, you could go to countries in Africa or the Middle East, and you'll find people who are oppressed, and you'll see that they have great humor. And oppression humor becomes a survival tool for people who are oppressed. It's one of the few things that they could do to battle the oppression that they must live under, So I think those factors kind of led to, in that period of time, a great flowering of Jewish humor that had an influence on American culture.
It's so funny you say that there is not an acrimonious argument to the culture, but that's one of the things I enjoyed. Just being the older guys, being a contrarian, because like it's almost like, are you just trying to argue? It's one thing I found irritating, but yet I miss now. I remember when I worked at ABC Radio Network, there was a fellow who worked there who's Jewish, and there was a fellow who is a kind of devout Christian who was a good friend. They're all good. We're all good friends, and but they were about 20 years my senior. But they would sit down, the arguments they would get into, and it would just be funny to listen to. And I miss being the fly on the wall at family events and things like that, and where you heard, I can hear my the drier sense of humor, like for instance, you mentioned Mel Brooks, and if I was to be able to go into a time machine and travel, I would love to sit down with him and Carl Reiner for one of their get-togethers, just to listen to them. What do they talk about? What did they talk? Because Carl Reiner reminded me so much of my grandfather. His humor, it wasn't yuck. It was kind of this dry, but it was just hilarious. It just landed. Who are your Mount Rushmore when you were coming up? Comedy-wise, the people you're looking at, like they're doing the thing I want to do.
The person before I got turned on to Mel Brooks was not like an on-screen personality for a long time. When I was a kid, he was like he'd done The Producers, and I wasn't really like exposed to the 2,000-year-old man when I was young, so I didn't really know too much about him. The person that was not even a Mount Rushmore, he was all by himself. At the top of that heap was Woody Allen for me. We shared the same birthday, which always I thought was a cool thing. This is all pre-controversial Woody Allen. This is what the young guy, and he was the first. He's from this neighborhood, and here he is. He's made movies, and I thought, wow, somebody who actually did this. Somebody was able to do this, and I was amazed by that. Bananas and Take the Money and Run, I must have seen them each like a dozen times each, and just absorb.
Oh, plus he was the first guy that had his physical stature, the way he spoke and all that. He's the first one that ended up, you know what I mean? You wouldn't see this I want to say nebbishy guy. Yeah, I wouldn't say that about him, but there wasn't anybody else like him out there. So I can see that a lot of people probably saw themselves.
He was original. Also,
level.
he started by writing jokes for other people. And I thought maybe that's something I could do. I could maybe write a joke and give it to a comedian or give it to a columnist or whoever I could give it to that might need it. And maybe I could make money that way as a freelance comedy writer. And so he gave me ideas about, he gave me a way to sort of ground my ambition in something real. Then I got exposed to, there was a show on in New York, David Susskind used to host a show on Sunday nights, and he did a show about how to be a Jewish son. And David Steinberg was on, and Mel Brooks was on that show, as well as a couple of non-show business guys. But Mel Brooks, that was my first real exposure to him, and he was hilarious. And then I became very addicted to Mel Brooks also, got into the 2,000-Year-Old Man. Very soon after, I loved The Producers, and then Blazing Saddles came along, which was, again, that was one of those earth-shattering moments also, seeing Blazing Saddles. So those two guys, later on, like in high school, I got into Lenny Bruce. He was too adult for when I was a kid, but once I became sophisticated enough, I got into Lenny Bruce, and those three really are like for me, the Mount Rushmore of comedy.
Well, Lenny Bruce was the first one. The older you get, you realize the chances he was taking and the middle finger he was extending to the way things were done. Yeah. Really, he was the first man who landed on that shore.
Yes. The fourth person who doesn't get as much attention, but my parents would go up to the Catskills for like a week once a year in the summer, and they would have nightclubs, and all the comedians would play the nightclubs. And the funniest comedian who had the audience rolling in the aisles was Jackie Mason. And Jackie Mason...
I was as you're saying this, I'm thinking Jackie Mason in my head.
Yeah, he was... I would sit in the back. You were allowed to sneak into the nightclub and watch. And I watched him. I must have seen him also a dozen times live like that in the hotels. And what he could do to an audience to get them rolling in the aisles, it wasn't even that he had material. He didn't really have material the way Woody Allen did. He just had a rhythm. And he would get you caught up in his rhythm, and people would start laughing, and the laughing came in tidal waves after a while. And
it's kind of like Don Rickles was the same way.
Right.
Don had that. It was very similar. Yeah.
I loved Don Rickles also, and I loved Rodney Dangerfield. I would say that would round out my youth, basically, right there. I loved George Carlin too, and I loved when Richard Pryor came of age with his concert movies and everything. Richard Pryor also changed my life. He came out with a couple of albums and then the concert movies, and that was yet another step up, and he was really George Carlin was like a non-Jewish comedian, so he was drawing on other influences, and Richard Pryor, being a black comedian, was drawing on his influences, and that expanded my comedy language as well.
Yeah, Richard Pryor, he changed the game. When he came in, it was a whole different thing. And I just remember when I was a kid, Eddie Murphy. You draw the kind of the daisy chain he connected to Richard Pryor, and I just love that one thing when he said Bill Cosby. Which, of course, this kind of holds up in its own way. But he talked about Bill Cosby and how Bill Cosby called him up, so you can't keep saying these things. Yeah. And then he called up Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor's like, "Fuck him," It's like, who are you watching now? Who is it now that you think is carrying the torch comedically? Even the writing, even kind of telling stories. Who's out there right now you're watching?
Well, first of all, just let me say, both Richard Pryor and George Carlin continue to have influence even today on stand-up comedy. You see their influence. Those two schools of comedy still are, being explored. That they started, really, even though they have roots themselves that go back. I really like a lot of stand-up. I don't find too much in movies or in television that actually makes me laugh out loud, But I can watch, Bill Burr or somebody like that, and they will really, really make me laugh, There's a lot of comedians that I'll go on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, and I'll get turned on to all kinds of comedy. And I have eclectic taste in comedy. It doesn't have to be a certain kind of genre. I like all kinds of things. There's a guy named Tim Heidecker who does brilliant stuff, very conceptual, you know. There's Bill Burr, who just kind of is like talking from his soul, you know, and there's just a lot of...
Yeah, I wouldn't want to get into the other side of a debate with Bill Burr about something he's very convicted about. You know, it's like he has strong convictions because he makes good arguments. You know, and I just saw something the other day. He was on a red carpet or something, and somebody started talking politics with him. He's like, I don't watch it. Why are you coming to me? You know, and he just lays them out.
A great word before, because I think that a contrarian, I think comedy... And I've hung out with a lot of comedians. There's a contrarian quality to comedy that is part of what sort of inspires and motivates and is a catalyst for a lot of comedy is the contrarian point of view. And George Carlin really personified that really well, I thought.
You know, it's only when I got a little older that I started appreciating he wasn't just being a contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian. He was more just don't fall into the propaganda of everything. Right. You know, question it. Just be questioning. You know, you may land at the same place, but question.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I was curious about is the things that you'd done, like Mad About You. When you give birth to something and you've created it, and that's out in the world, and it starts taking on a life of its own, and people start back in the era when you had 4 networks and even 3. What's that like for you when you see a show or Seinfeld or anything else that just skyrocketed? Is it humbling? Is it sort of like, okay, this worked? Or you think about it mechanically? What's going on in your mind as you see something taking off? In the moment, are you feeling like, wow, this is awesome? Are you is it only after the show's off the air and you can retrospect, look back, and you can fully appreciate the impact it had? What's that like for you?
Well, just to clarify for the record, I didn't create Mad About You or Seinfeld, but I was an important part of both those shows. I would say that the experience... It was so hard to produce a sitcom in terms of the logistics of actually the production itself, the casting, the editing, but mostly the writing. There was so much pressure to come up with scripts that in the moment, even when the shows became wildly successful, there was no place to step outside of it and go, wow, well, look at this. We're doing great. You know, It was like, what's next week's story? What's next week's script? What are we going to do? We don't have a story for next week. So the pressure was crushing, really, for a show like Seinfeld. I mean, Larry David wanted to quit every week. He just did not want to go on because the pressure was just crushing.
Well, when you say the pressure, is it the pressure to succeed, or is it pressure from the network, or
pressure? No, an internal pressure to create. To come up with a story. You know, one of the reasons Seinfeld is great because we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to come up with great, funny stories that made us laugh. And that's not easy to do. And it goes to your question of why there isn't a lot more comedy today that feels that way. And that's because the language of comedy is in flux right now. All the cancel culture and the woke culture, and those things have a lot of value. And they are important, but what they have done is thrown comedy into a flux. And so now people are trying to find their footing and figure out what's funny. Nobody really knows anymore. There was kind of a common ground of what was funny for a long time.
Yeah, Blazing Saddles could not get made now.
Right.
There's no way.
now, and it's a smaller audience for each thing. And that's good in a way, but it means that the language of comedy is very hard to define. And it's kind of like we're coming up with a new language, and it's an evolutionary process that will take a little time.
For its time, it was. I just enjoyed watching it. But Entourage, how did you get involved in that? Because that's a little different than kind of everything else you were doing.
Yeah, although for me it connected. Doug and Steve, the two guys who basically created the show, were trying to recreate their experience in Hollywood, which was like they were guys from Long Island, they were buddies. They eventually, Steve became friends with Mark Wahlberg. Mark Wahlberg had this crazy entourage and real people that the show was based on. And they were like regular people thrust into this world of show business. It wasn't really about show business. It was about these friends trying to navigate a world that they really didn't know, and trying to maintain.
See, that's kind of the way I perceived it, and it kind of grew throughout. They seemed to get more matured into it. And if you're a young man in his 20s in Hollywood at that era, I mean, that seemed to be kind of real. That's why I think it connected. It seemed like it's very plausible. I
think the key to all of these things, as you're saying, is this is true of Seinfeld and it's true of Entourage, is honesty. You could criticize them. You could say a lot of things about them that are critical that would be true. But the thing that you cannot deny is that they had a certain level of honesty, and that honesty resonates with an audience is looking for something that's real and honest. No matter how surreal or crazy or stylized it is, it's got to have some sort of truth to it, And if that truth cuts through, the audience gets a chance to really connect to it. And that is a very hard variable in all these shows. A lot of shows miss it. A lot of shows don't really nail that truth, even though they might be cool shows, and they never really connect in that way. But Seinfeld and Entourage, despite whatever justifiable criticism people might have of them, they were speaking truth, and that couldn't be denied. And that spoke volumes to an audience, and you can't change that. That's really an important connection that is something you strive for, but you can't really force. Yeah,
I think people have a sense of BS meter for lack of authenticity. They crave that, whether it's something that they ascribe to or believe in. It's like, this seems real. It seems like it can happen. I wouldn't do that necessarily. I'm wondering, when y'all were crafting the idea of a quintessential, like an agent of a certain age and a certain, how did Ari Goldberg, or was it Ari Gold, right? That was the character. But was that something like, okay, let's create an agent?
Mark Wahlberg. And Mark Wahlberg's agent and my agent was a guy named Ari Emanuel. He was Larry David's agent. He was the Uber agent of Hollywood, especially at that time. And he was like this kind of force of nature sort of personality he was like ferocious, and if he was on your side, that was great. Later on in my life, he was against me, and it was much less comfortable, But that character, Ari Gold, was initially based on Ari Emanuel, and then the brilliant casting of Jeremy Piven to embody that role. He also was a ferocious, intense actor, and he brought that character to life. So it's almost like Kramer. There was a real Kramer, but casting Michael Richards as Kramer, that synthesis is what made Kramer so amazing. And the same thing with Ari Gold. There was Ari Emanuel, but Jeremy Piven playing Ari Gold is what brought that character to life. The idea to hang out with characters is a big part of what makes TV shows successful, or at least used to be. I mean, you wanted to sit in the coffee shop with the Seinfeld characters. You wanted to go on adventures with the Entourage characters. You wanted to sit at the bar at Cheers. That was a kind of an important element in what made those shows successful. You could see yourself there. You wanted to be there, and that was a kind of a great seduction of those shows.
One thing I've been curious about with Sacha Baron Cohen, who just feels fearless, like to be, the stories I hear about the making of these films, he was legitimately in danger, it seems like, a few times. How did that collaboration come together where y'all were, clearly there was a story you're wanting to tell and kind of like put a mirror up to culture, if you will. How did that all come together, just, generally with you and Sacha Baron Cohen and the projects y'all worked on?
Well, that movie started with a different director. There was a director named Todd Phillips, very successful director, started making that movie, and he and Sacha did not get along, and they shot for like 2 weeks or something, and then they went their separate ways. And the movie sort of fell apart. And I was working on Curb Your Enthusiasm, and if you rewind like about 2 years before all this, Larry David and I used to go quite often, because we worked for HBO, we would go to boxing matches that HBO was broadcasting. And we went to a boxing match downtown at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, and we would go into the VIP lounge and kind of hang out. It was very luxurious, and it was a very privileged time for me. It was something I haven't really experienced much since. And at that VIP lounge waiting for the fights to begin, Ari Emanuel was there. And he had a client, and that client was Sacha Baron Cohen, who I knew from his TV show in England, where he did the Ali G and he did Borat and Bruno. So he and I kind of met in this lounge, and we just talked for a while with no sort of ambitions, no agenda whatsoever. We just kind of hung out and talked, and we really liked each other, and we really hit it off. And then we went our separate ways. And like 2 years later, I got a call asking if I would be interested in directing Borat. And I came in and, I loved Borat. I loved the TV show. I loved his sketches on the TV show. And so I saw some of the footage, and I thought it was amazing and one of a kind. And I immediately said yes to that. And we started working. We had no prep time, in fact. We almost went out almost immediately and started shooting. And it was kind of on-the-job training for me to figure out how to get a great Borat scene. But I had a great instinct for it, and it worked out.
He is such a talented guy. Like, The Spy, I think? The drama about the Israeli spy.
Right. I never saw that.
I think with the Egypt. Yeah, it was, you see him do it. I'm like, oh, this guy can do seemingly everything,
Yeah.
But, you directed, you've written, you've produced. Is there any preference in any vein? Like, okay, I like being in the director's seat, or, I like just kind of hanging it, writing it, putting it out there. I mean, what's your preference, or do you have one?
Well, directing was a kind of a pipe dream. It seemed like very unrealistic to me. I was embarrassed. Like, if in Brooklyn, you couldn't say to people, oh, I want to be an actor, or I want to be a director. You would get beat up, you would get chased, you would get abused, So I never told anybody I wanted to be a director. And even once I started having writing success, I had this hankering, this dream to direct, and I didn't know how. I was in show business, I was successful, I still couldn't figure out how to make this transition from writing to directing. And at a certain point, around Mad About You, I kind of gave up on it, really. And then Larry David did Curb Your Enthusiasm. He started Curb Your Enthusiasm, and he said to me, you should direct one of these, just out of the blue. He knew from Seinfeld that I was very into where the cameras were and, where the actors were, blocking and stuff. So he knew that I had an innate kind of instinct for it. And he said, you should direct one of these. And I said, yes. And boom, I was a director. And
that show had a different feel. It wasn't, you didn't have the camera on sticks. It was almost
handheld,
documentary style in kind of a way,
Yes. It was a great way to start directing because it was all instinct. And it wasn't about crafts as much as it was like discovering and finding it and figuring it out. It was a lot like Seinfeld in the sense that there was no Seinfeld. To create the formula for Seinfeld took a few seasons until we cracked the code. And the same thing with Curb. There was no Curb, but it evolved into what became Curb, and I was able to be there in the kind of nascent stages of both of those things. And I became a director. So I love directing, but directing is hard work in the sense that you have to get up in the morning and you have to show up whether you feel like it or not. And you've got to interact with hundreds of people. And, you've got to be on. And it's a performance as much for the director as it is for the actors. So there's a lot of that kind of pressure in directing, but it's very satisfying. It's very fulfilling. It's you're leading this gang of people. It's like being the captain in an army. And it's very, very satisfying on all these other levels besides the...
Yeah, because you want them to trust. Seems like it's really an exercise in evoking trust from someone. Like if they trust you, they'll
right.
Because you're asking them to do things they may not necessarily agree with.
You have to create a security blanket for people to do things that they wouldn't normally do, especially in something like Borat. But writing, where I could stay home, get up anytime I want, and start writing and be by myself and be in my head, that is I find that to be a more relaxing experience. I'm not putting my life on the line. No matter what crazy ideas I might have, if I'm writing them, I'm safe. And I'm in a kind of a cocoon and an environment that I'm very comfortable in. Whereas directing, you'll find yourself in very, very precarious positions, and you can't say, "Oh, I don't feel like doing it." You have to do it, so you have to push through. So directing has other, it has other pressures that writing doesn't have. But I love them both. Really, I'm lucky. I feel totally lucky that I have both of these sort of arrows in my quiver.
Hi, it's Daniel from John Buys Bay Area Houses. We hear from homeowners every day who need to sell fast, whether it's a life change, a problem property, or they just can't wait around.
When I inherited my grandmother's house, it felt like too much to handle.
Being a landlord was draining me. All those constant repairs and tenant issues.
At John Buys Bay Area Houses, we make selling your house simple. Sell as is without any fees, commissions, or hassles. Call 510-800-JOHN or visit our website and you'll get a fair cash offer in minutes.
I sold Grandma's house and finally felt free.
They handled all the property headaches and I could finally relax.
Start fresh. Don't let your house hold you back. Call 510-800-JOHN or search online for John Buys Bay Area Houses to get your cash offer today. That's 510-800-JOHN.
Start fresh with John Buys Bay Area Houses.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you love true crime or comedy, celebrity interviews or news, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue. And guess what? Now you can call them on your auto insurance too with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. Get your quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Before we get going, I always do what I call my 7 questions to wrap up.
Okay.
A little extra fun. And the first question I always ask, because I always talk about food at least once. What is your favorite comfort food? That one thing you've had good day, bad day, but doesn't make a difference. It just kind of lands for you.
Well, I would say that there are deli items that go back to my childhood that still give me that kind of comfort. Whether it's chopped liver or pickled herring or bagel and lox. Those are the kind of things that I've always loved. I just had whitefish salad the other day. And the sort of association with those foods really give me a tremendous amount of comfort.
That's what a wonderful way to put it. Your association with the food. It's not just the food itself.
Yes.
Yes. I can't have a hard kosher salami without thinking of my grandparents.
Exactly.
And they would hang the salami, and my grandmother, I swear, if you ate the very end of it, you better run because my grandmother will find you. Growing up in New York, you had all the great stuff there, and I'd spoken with Andrew Zimmer, and
Sure.
we did Food Network and whatnot, and we were lamenting over how like delis are kind of going by the wayside, which really breaks my heart. I don't know totally, but like in New York, you had the big one closed.
Yeah, a bunch of them closed here too in Los Angeles. So,
but yeah, Cantor's is. I remember I was there. My grandfather actually met my grandmother at the Bullock's on Wilshire, which was back. It used to be a department store.
I know it well.
He was traveling, and he back when department stores buy directly from salespeople, and they met out there, and then so he had this little connection in L.A. and I was out there. I forgot I was out seeing my agent or something. I forgot what I was doing. And he said, "You got to go to Cantor's." I said, "Cantor's, what's that?" I show up. I'm like, "Oh, this is my place. You can go there at the right time of day. You can see somebody who can barely have a couple nickels to rub together, and then you have folks in TV and film, So I took my daughter there for the first time last time we were there, and I felt like, okay, now you're the 4th generation who's been here, So I'm glad they're hanging out. They're hanging in there.
When I first lived in Los Angeles, when I first came to LA in the late 70s, it was 24 hours. And when you did the comedy clubs, that was the place to go after the comedy clubs closed, like at 2:00 in the morning. And the music clubs would also close at that time. So Canton was like packed at 2:00 in the morning with famous musicians and famous comedians because it was the place to hang out. It was like it was a dream, really, to go there at that time. I loved it.
Oh, they got that mishmash, which is, I got to say that one thing I've got a recipe I've come up with over the years of matzo ball soup, which I'm quite proud of. But when I'm out there, got to do that mishmash where this kind of throw everything in the bowl, and a salami sandwich. I'm very basic, very basic.
Oh, man, that's great.
But I love how you said the associations, because again, it's not just the way it tastes, which is great, but it's memories. You feel like you kind of feel the history in it, why, But the next question I got for you of my 7 is if you're going to sit down, you're going to talk story for a few hours over coffee, let's say at Cantor's, who would the 3 people be that you would like to sit down with? And it's not just your conversation, but you get to observe their conversation. Who would those, living or not, who would those 3 people be you would enjoy sitting down with?
Well, one would be, the name that popped into my mind first was Billy Wilder. Billy Wilder, to me, was the consummate craftsman. His stories, his movies, his screenplays are jewels of craft. They're kind of perfect in a way. So he would be one person. Can I say somebody like Shakespeare? I'm just curious what his take would be on writing today, to be able to sit with him and find out, what his craft was, what his writing habits were even. And that to me would be an incredible person to include in that sort of group, And the third person might be somebody like Lenny Bruce, actually, because when I was young and I would read, I actually read Lenny Bruce before I even heard him. And I was...
Really?
Yeah, because there was a book.
Did he have little articles? Did he have books?
He had books. He had a book called The Essential Lenny Bruce, and he had a book called How to Talk Dirty and Influence People. He had those 2 books. And... So I learned his routines from the books before I heard the records. And I was always struck by the craft of those things, too. I thought, wow, these are stream of consciousness sort of stories that, are unique in the way that they're like jazz, but with comedy, So he might be...
Oh, that's what a wonderful connection. Jazz and comedy. It's but free form with a little bit of a plan in there, that would a great I see that. Well, as kind of a side note, we mentioned, I forgot to ask you, how did the Religulous thing come together with you and Bill Maher? Was that something that, did y'all already have an established relationship where, this was being discussed? Or did he kind of okay, we need a director for this thing?
No, actually it was interesting because we didn't know each other. We had a lot of mutual friends, but we did not know each other. And after Borat was done, Fox wanted us to do a sequel to Borat. And we really didn't want to do it, and Sacha was absolutely against doing a sequel. But we had one meeting where the writers and myself and Sacha talked about, could there be a sequel to this movie? And at that meeting, I suggested that Borat tries to find a new religion for Kazakhstan. And the idea was rejected, but I went off myself and I thought, wow, there's something about religion. And I knew, because of my knowledge of movies, I knew all the religious movies, all the Charlton Heston stuff, all the King of Kings, and, just all the cheesy religious movies that had been made in Hollywood. And I was like, wow, I could do some kind of religious satire and use these movies, these pop culture references, and this would be like a fun movie. And I told my agent, and he said, we just were told that Bill Maher wants to do a movie that's a satire of religion. So they got us together and we sat down, and Bill had written a number of essays about religion, and I had all these ideas about satirizing religion through using pop culture references, and we put that together, and that became the movie.
I think at the time some people attacked it as being an attack on religion. It was just, I think no religion was left untouched, right. For the most part, Yeah. And I always, one of the things, even being a Jew, I'm like, that thing of the, what they call the Shabbos Goy,
Yeah.
It's like, okay, but you're the one who decided to have them do this, so you're equally accountable, like, oh God, I think you're in Israel, and he went somewhere and they were like, be in elevators or telephones, and it's like this whole all these contraptions people come up with.
Get around the Shabbos rules. That was like fascinating. That it's like, well, why do these rules exist? If you just spend your entire life trying to figure out ways around it, and they would say, well, this is what God wants us to figure out a way around it. So there was all this kind of always this sophist logic to all these different religions. They all had their own hypocrisies, and they had their own rationalizations. It's fascinating.
That's one of the things that I think it's so relevant today, because the way that and again, no organized religion is safe from criticism, but you look at what's going on today in America, the way that and you got a lot of good friends who are Christians. Some are very devout Christians, but they don't ascribe to this stuff you hear about on these folks who are like they were voting on something in Congress the other day, and everybody's praying. I'm like, I don't know much about the New Testament, but I know you're not supposed to do that. Like doing it out in the open is not like, it's supposed to be a private. Now it's being used as a justification, kind of a gift, like a wrapping around a more nefarious, intent, which is, I don't know. So it's even in a way, let's just say it holds up. And I think that anybody hasn't seen Religulous, it's just, I don't know where it's streaming. I want my son to see it because I know he would love watching it.
It's on somewhere like Amazon or something like that. You can find it.
Isn't that funny? We live in an area. It's on somewhere. Like this thing. Everything I want to watch a lot of times is behind a paywall. So I guess I have good taste. Right. But the next question I got for you is, when you were a young guy, you have a good memory. So we got to know, who was your very first celebrity crush?
You mean like a woman that I fell in love with?
Yeah. Somebody saw, I was like, oh my God, who is this?
Wow,
that's a really captivating.
It might have been somebody like Mary Tyler Moore, actually, more than a movie star. I mean, I remember Some Like It Hot and being completely blown away by Marilyn Monroe and that. That's not the most original answer, but I think a lot of people were. But Marilyn Monroe was absolutely singular in her beauty. I mean, I loved all those women. I loved Rita Hayworth and Jane Russell, and I love the TV women too. I mean, Mary Tyler Moore, even Donna Reed. It's like I didn't. I don't think I discriminated very much. I really was like interested in all of them, and just kind of like turned.
Well, Mary Tyler Moore had that chutzpah. She was kind of a dynamo in the industry as well. So that's
had that insouciance, and she just had a certain kind of way about her, a demeanor that was very appealing.
Well, very good, very good. Now, the next question I got for you: if you're going to be forced to live on an exotic island for a whole year, all right, it's somewhere you want to be. It's somewhere very nice, but you don't have streaming. So since you don't have streaming, you're going to want to listen to music, and you're allowed to bring one CD or let's say a box set. You can do that too. That you can listen to over and over again. And the same thing with a movie. So you can bring a DVD. What would that CD be, or a box set? And what would that movie be you'd bring to the island? Something you could watch over and over again. You're just not going to tire of.
Well, I was just thinking this morning, I didn't know you were going to ask this, but I was thinking this morning how much I loved Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here. And particularly Shine On You Crazy Diamond. And that's an album that's now, I don't know, 40 years old or something, but I constantly go back to it. And there's something that really resonates in that album for me. And I think if I had to, I might choose that album, or I would choose like a Pink Floyd box set, because their music spans so much interesting styles and genres and periods. I always find there's more to be gotten out of their music. So again, off the top of my head, I might say Pink Floyd. As far as a movie goes, one movie, that is a tough one, but I might choose something like, and this might seem like a weird choice for me, but it's not, is Weekend by Jean-Luc Godard. It's a French movie. It's very dense. It's a kind of movie that you can't really watch one time and get everything out of it. And I think a movie that you're going to be stuck on a desert island with is a movie that has to keep on revealing itself.
Layers, like where you're kind of seeing different.
Yeah. And so Weekend has always been a movie that it's like, wow, every time I watch it, I see it from a different angle and I see new things. And it's almost like a painting in a way that keeps revealing different details to you. So might be my two choices, but tomorrow I might have different.
How great is I've never seen that before. That's one thing I love about doing this. I get to discover things I hadn't heard of before or seen. You know, if you were to define next question, if you were to define from the time you get up to the time you go to sleep, all the component or a handful of component parts of a perfect day for you, what would some of those component parts be? Like if you had these things happen in a day, it's like, this is a perfect day. What would that be?
Well, I was just hanging out with my wife, and I really, really adore my wife. And so any perfect day would involve me hanging out with my wife. I really like that. I probably feel the most myself with my wife. And so that would be one, absolute essential component of it. Writing something that, kind of stumbling into something that I was excited about creatively in my writing, that would also be a very important component. I would say directing, but you can't really do anything else if you're directing.
Yeah.
So I love directing. If I was to have a day of directing that really went well, that also, the end of a day of good directing where things really worked out, that's an exhilarating day also, So those kind of things, watching a great movie, and reading a great book, both of those things are things that I pretty much do every day, and when I have the time, and those give me great satisfaction also. So it would be some sort of combination of those things.
Now, next question: if you weren't doing this for a living, and somebody said, Larry, you're not going to be able to do anything, writing, directing, anything like this, you've got to find another vocation or something else you could have done that would bring you joy as well. What do you think that would be?
Well, I always regretted not learning how to play an instrument or read music. But so let's take that out of the equation since I can't do that. But I think I would choose drawing, actually, like cartooning. Cartooning is something that I've always been attracted to. I was very good at it at one time. I've kind of fallen out of practice because I don't really do it anymore. But I think if all those other avenues were closed off to me, I think I would go back. And again, drawing, like writing, is something I could do sitting here at my desk. So I love that idea, that I can be as creative as I want. I could be in any world that I want inside my head and put it down on paper. I think cartooning would be the creative outlet for me.
The thing about the instrument, I'm the same way, but of course you've had the opportunity, like you spent time with Bob Dylan,
Yeah.
I would be inspired at the same time. I'd be like, yeah, I can't do that. There's no way. So you could, that's your thing. I know I'm not going to get to that level.
Right. I have been learning how to play the harmonica. I was even taking lessons. And then I ended up working with Bob Dylan. And I actually gave up the harmonica because I felt like an idiot, playing harmonica, like with Bob Dylan around. It's like ridiculous. It's like he's the greatest harmonica player of all time. So
you see a guy like that, and he's got the guitar and the harmonica. I'm like, what's going on? How is this possible? It was the complete unknown. Watch that, which I think was just so wonderful.
Yeah.
I think to be a musician, you have to almost be so deep into it to really, I don't know if I'd have necessarily the patience. I'm too impatient, I think, to be a musician.
Me too. That's my problem.
Now, the last question I got for you, if you were to jump into that DeLorean and you can go back to when you were 16 years old, you have a piece of advice for yourself. You got a few minutes to offer a piece of advice, either to make that moment a little bit better or maybe put yourself on a little different track. What would that piece of advice be to 16-year-old you?
Wow. I would say trust your instincts. Don't, have doubts, have uncertainty, but become comfortable with those doubts and uncertainty, because if you can navigate your doubts and your uncertainty and trust your instinct, you will get to a place that is fulfilling. Joseph Campbell used to talk about following your bliss, and I don't think there's any substitute for that. I think that but when you're a teenager, you're all over the place for a million different reasons. And what I would suggest to the 16-year-old me was relax, get into yourself, think about your mind, don't be scared of the future, be trusting of your own instincts, and you will get where you have to go. It may not be where you think you want to go even, but you'll get where you have to go.
Mm-hmm. Which kind of reminds me of that phrase, man plans, God laughs, But that kind of brings it back to your father, because, he didn't necessarily go that direction, and that there was some regret there from what you told me, So, but I think you went a pretty good direction. I think you, and I can't wait to get really further into your book. I really have enjoyed it. I like your writing style is just, it's an easy read. I will say that. And I'm so looking forward to it. And it's a jewel box of a lot of wonderful stories. And I think that's, it's its own gift. And I think it's, especially having watched all of these shows. And I think there was I don't want to call it a golden era, but there was, in let's say the 90s, TV was, a lot of things were becoming possible, and you were right there, and you were doing a lot of amazing stuff. And I'm so fortunate to do, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to just sit down and give it, just, shoot the shit, And I'm looking forward to the other part of the 1,000 pages, for the next one. I wish you nothing but the best, and hopefully you'll have an opportunity to catch up down the line.
Same to you, my friend. Great to meet you. Thank you for your time.
All right, there you go. Larry Charles. What a cool pulling back of the curtain to kind of find out a little bit more about how things were made. Some of the most iconic television shows. Again, he's just been involved in everything, it seems like, and all different corners of all things comedy, which, you know me, if you listen to the show, I love comedies. I want more comedies. The goofier, the better. And don't forget the new book from Larry Charles, the memoir, which is, I like the title. It's a lot of fun. Comedy Samurai, 40 years. That was Ranger, by the way. I'm not even going to retake this. I'm just going to go do it again. Comedy Samurai, 40 years of blood, guts, and laughter. And it's a great book. I've gotten into it. It is very cool. A lot of great stories. And he's a great storyteller, like the way he writes also. Very easy read, as I mentioned. Do me a favor, if you would, just pop on over to storyandcraftpod.com. Everything you want to know about the show, doggone it, it is right there. You want to send me a note? You can do that also. You want to find out about a past guest? Well, that's there too. Also, do me a favor, if you would, on your podcast app, make sure to follow Story and Craft. New episode rolls out. Boom, you got yourself a notification. Also, leave a review. Leave some stars. Help people find Story and Craft. It is much appreciated. And as I mentioned, we're living in kind of a wild world right now, man. It's especially if you're one of our U.S. listeners. It's crazy times, I tell you. So if you're like me, podcast, kick it on. I get to kind of check out for a moment. So if you've jumped on to listen to the show, just kind of check out and have a little time to yourself. Thank you very much for doing that. It's a compliment. Again, thank you so much for making whatever I've got going on here part of whatever you've got going on. It is greatly appreciated. So go have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week. We will see you shortly on the next episode of Story and Craft.
That's it for this episode of Story and Craft. Join Mark next week for more conversation right here on Story and Craft. Story and Craft is a presentation of Mark Preston Productions, LLC. Executive producer is Mark Preston. Associate producer is Zachary Holden. Please rate and review Story and Craft on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. You can subscribe to show updates and stay in the know. Just head to storyandcraftpod.com and sign up for the newsletter. I'm Emma Dylan. See you next time, and remember, keep telling your story.
Head to Safeway this week for these amazing digital deals for members. USDA Choice Boneless Beef Top Round London Broil, just $4.97 per pound. Limit 2 packages. Add ears of sweet corn as a side for just 27 cents each. Limit 10. And for you cheese lovers, Lucerne chunk or cream cheese or Sargento shredded or sliced cheese, just $2.47 each. Limit 4 items of various sizes and varieties. Visit Safeway.com for more details. See you in the aisles.
Just grabbing my charger. Heading to Sam's for dinner.
Okay, but you'll miss your favorite tenderloin.
Wait, is that the Tuscan herb?
Mm-hmm. Hatfield marinated Tuscan herb. That's a real shame.
Did I say I was going to Sam's? Sam's coming here. Keep up, Dad.
When better care leads to better pork, it's irresistible. Hatfield Pork. Better care, better pork.